In this section, we will list those documents that are required to be carried in flight. The following documentation is required to be aboard: the certificates of registration and airworthiness, a noise certificate, if this is applicable to the aircraft and the airport, and a copy of, or the original of, the air operator certificate and proof of third-party insurance. Additionally, the flight crew and the aircraft radio must be appropriately licensed. The operator must keep a current approved aeroplane flight manual, AFM, or its documentary equivalent, for each aeroplane operated. Sometimes, especially for smaller aeroplanes, this document is called the Pilot Operating Handbook, POH. Obviously, the AFM should be carried unless the material contained in the Ops Manual Part B is an acceptable substitute. Additionally, all parts of the Ops Manual relevant to the crew should be available and, as far as that pertinent to the flight crew, easily accessible in flight. On a modern airliner, this information is usually stored electronically and is available through the Flight Management System, FMS. Flight information required to be carried includes information about the route and conditions, current maps, charts, procedures, etc., plus weather, route and airport information, and a copy of the Air Traffic Services flight plan must be aboard. Aeroplane information must comprise at least the aeroplane technical log and mass and balance information. Operational information must include the operational flight plan plus details of any special passengers, deportees, persons in custody, etc., and any special loads including the transportation of dangerous goods. Finally, any particular recording and reporting requirements of each concerned state, authority and the operator must be met. To conclude, here is a list of all other information and forms required to be carried in flight. On screen are the documents, manuals, information and forms required aboard. In the previous segment, the operational flight plan was mentioned. This is a more detailed document than the operator must keep, that is, the journey logbook. However, each document contains information that is common to both, as each is a record of the flight. Because the operational flight plan will be used to construct and record the flight, it contains much detail relevant to the aircraft, flight crew, route, timings and performance, navigational and meteorological factors. Basically, upon receipt of this document, any inspector should be able to accurately reconstruct the flight. First, in the pre-flight preparation of the document, aircraft details are required: the type, variant and registration, along with details of the flight crew and their individual duties, pilot in command, co-pilot, etc. Next, details of the route are inserted: times, places, altitudes, speeds, fuel and alternate requirements, etc. Additionally, meteorological information is inserted. In flight, the following details are added: actual times of departure and arrival, off and on blocks, and overhead waypoints, fuel checks, air traffic clearances, and any requirements for in-flight replanning. As already mentioned, this information should be detailed enough to allow a reconstruction of the flight to be made. Finally, here are the operational flight plan contents in full. Note that if this information is held elsewhere, for example on the jet plan, it need not be reproduced in this document. The next document, the journey log, is an abbreviated version of the operational jet plan and is kept on the ground by the operator. Just like the previous document, if information is held elsewhere, it need not be reproduced in this log. As such, here, without further elaboration, is the list of its contents. If there is a problem in flight, or worst of all, if the aircraft is lost, there must be sufficient information about that flight kept on the ground so as to be able to reconstruct the flight, albeit for accident investigation purposes. This section will list the minimum documentation about a flight that should be kept on the ground. The operator must ensure that all information relevant to the flight and appropriate for the type of operation is preserved on the ground and is retained until it has been duplicated at the place at which it will be stored, or, if this is impractical, it is carried in a fireproof container in the aeroplane. Here is a list of the required flight and operational information. The operator must ensure that all records and all relevant operational and technical information for each individual flight are stored for the periods prescribed in the following tables. Other than the technical log, which must be kept for 24 months after the last entry, information used for the preparation and execution of a flight must be kept for 3 months after the flight is completed. Flight reports must also be kept for 3 months. Next, the requirement for storage of flight crew documents. These are generally for 3 years, except for crew duty and recency records, which are kept for 15 months, and licensing records, which must be kept for as long as the license holder flies for the operator. The operator must also pass on the crew duty records if the crew member becomes employed by another operator. Finally, here are some other record storage requirements. The operator must preserve the documents for the required period even if he ceases to be the operator of the aeroplane. In addition to the paper records discussed previously, modern airliners are fitted with flight recorders, both of flight data and sounds heard on the flight deck. These recordings may also help in the investigation of any occurrences, and so their records must be preserved by the operator. The original recording on the flight recorder should be preserved by the operator for 60 days under the following circumstances: an accident, a reportable incident, and any other time the National Aviation Authority requires that it is done. The last topic of this lesson concerns the inspection of the operation, including its documents and records. The operator must allow any person authorised by the authority to board and fly in any aeroplane operated under the AOC issued by that authority. This includes entry to the flight deck, albeit that the commander can refuse entry for flight safety reasons. Additionally, the operator must allow their authority access to any documents and records related to flight operations or maintenance, and produce the retained documents and records, including those from the flight recorder, within a reasonable period of time. The commander's remit is similar. He must, within a reasonable period of time, produce the documentation required to be carried on board. This concludes the 2-lesson investigation of manuals, logs, documents and records.